Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our YouTube channel, Wagner on Ethics and Leadership. Um, Today's episode is about another book that Dr. Wagner has written. You are aware, Dr. Wagner is a full time professor of philosophy and logic with the College of Human Sciences and Humanities at the University of Houston, Clear Lake. He is also a professor of STEM education with the College of Education at the University of Houston, Clear Lake. Um, Professor Wagner has had an interesting career. He has been honored by the Who's Who in America, Who's Who in the World, Who's Who in American Education, and Outstanding Young Man in America. After writing 11 books and 200 articles, he's continuing his work. Today, we are going to talk about one of his book. Dr. Wagner, you have taught a graduate class for a number of years that was cross-listed as at the university in both psychology and philosophy. The class was titled Philosophy of Sex and Love. Oh, you had mentioned in our other video what the class was about. But years later, you wrote, after writing the book Love Trauma, you wrote another book which is titled Beyond Love Trauma. Today, we are going to explore the topics and what you wrote in the book Beyond Love Trauma. So, as the last book, the title is very suggestive. Could you please elaborate on what is love trauma? What is beyond love trauma, or what could be beyond love trauma?
Starting with the whole idea of love trauma. Love trauma means when your life is shattered because someone that you expected to spend the rest of your life with, that's not going to happen. And that's very traumatic. It's difficult for people. And how they work their way out of it is quite a challenge. Insurance companies wanted to raise the rates that men who had recently been divorced were charged for their car insurance because they had the data. Men are more likely to get in an automobile accident within the first 2 years after a divorce. All too often, alcohol is involved. Um, Men are also more likely to wind up suffering a medical event within 2 years of a divorce. What I mean by a medical event is one that um, wound up in the hospital, and they generally get over it. But it's a tough experience. So when you have gotten through love trauma, and we've talked about that before, there's a time to move on. And what makes up dating in today's world is really going to be very different. We tend to think that dating will be just like it was when we started dating 10, 20, 15 years or more before. And it's not. The world changes, and so do you. Most of us, when we were 16 years old, we really wanted to be older. And then when we get to be, say, 76 years old, we don't want to get any older, but that's just the way it is. And life is different at both those ages. The same is true when you're dating. When you're dating in high school, it's different than when you're dating in college. And when you're dating in college, it's different when you're out in the professional world and you uh, could be in a compromising position by dating at work rather than dating elsewhere. Whereas when you were in college, that was never a problem. So things change, and we're going to talk about how those changes came about. Folks, at one time, the rumor was that the divorce rate in this country was 50%. We were talking that way back in the 1980s. It was never 50% in those days. In the mid 90s, it finally did get up to 50%. So now we find a couple of things going on. There's a lot of people that have gotten divorced, and that's why they're back out in the dating routine again. And they're in early or advanced middle age, and they're back out dating again. Well, what worked before, dating wise, didn't work in picking out the right spouse. And besides that, the world, has changed. How do you negotiate or navigate the new world of dating that you're going to be in. And so that's one of the things that we want to talk about today. And that's one of the things that the book Beyond Love Trauma is addressing. Where are you in life right now? And what sorts of dating activities are most likely to reap appropriate rewards for you?
Okay. So you kind of touched on this. What audience is this book written for? Like their age or social and economic situation?
That's a wonderful question. People vary a lot, and we can detect differences in people just in this country from whether or not they grew up in the North or grew up in the South, grew up in the East or grew up in the West. We can also detect significant differences between people at various ages. So I had to make choices in writing a book in who I'm addressing. And so, given the realities that I was looking to, rather than my social and political preferences of, sharing as broadly as I can with everyone. If I shared broadly, generally with everyone, it would be uh, too general. It wouldn't offer people very much at all. So, to answer your question, I'm writing, and I'm trying to let the people I interviewed do my writing in a lot of ways. But I'm writing for women between 25 and 55, and I'm writing for men between 30 and 60. Now, why the age difference? Well, again, uh, that difference matches up a lot with how it is that couples tend to get together. The age difference between a couple of years and maybe 5 years is common. And uh, so that's what I picked out. Now, you mentioned about social class and economic class. Had to make distinctions there too. If you want to know how coal miners can match up with people that work at the local barbecue stands and so on, this book isn't for you, and I have nothing to say about that. So I had to make decisions, and I decided to work on people that were middle to upper class socially and middle to upper class economically. One of the reasons I chose that group was because that group is usually in a situation where they're going to be doing the most dating. They have enough money to pursue another person, to go out into the kind of environments where dating will occur. And, people at a socioeconomic level lower than that have a much more limited opportunity to take advantage of some of these recommendations. And people that are, quite wealthy, um, they're doing just fine. So that's my socioeconomic group that I focused in on, that I interviewed. And it's also the age groups that I'm addressing.
So you interviewed people from coast to coast, from north to south, and suburban, but not rural. Did you find significant social and cultural differences among the age groups you were studying?
Well, certainly, I've already mentioned, yeah, big difference in the age groups. Why I address the urban area? Because the people living in the urban area make up most of the people who are likely to read the book. More people live in the urban areas than in the rural areas. Now, I had a ranch out in the country, um, but one of the things you find is there are a lot of people that had lived in the country, as my ranch was placed. They uh, they have a very different way of going about socializing with one another, and they just don't have the opportunities oftentimes to get involved into situations that optimize their chances of meeting somebody that they never expected to meet and who might be just right for them. So I focus on the urban suburban area, not on the rural parts of the country. It's another limitation.
How do young and middle-aged adults begin dating after a failed relationship? Is it like friends fixing them up, for online dating, or they go to the bar, or hobbyist clubs, or charity organizations, symphonies, operas,
Yeah.
and the workplace,
Well,
music
let's
halls,
start with the bad ones first, and then we'll go to
bad
the good
ones.
ones. Yeah.
Okay.
The bad ones first are don't go to a bar. A
Mm-hmm.
bar is one of the worst places for somebody to meet somebody that they might have a real enduring interest in. Now, having said that, you can ask people that you've just met and so on, oh, I never go to bars. And of course, the people you're talking to will probably tell you the same thing. And the two of you may be standing in a bar. I just never go to a bar, but there you are. And you just happen to be there. So everybody does go to a bar from time to time to meet other people. But it isn't a good place to meet other people. Think about it. Why are you in that bar that night? You are in that bar that night because you have nothing else to do. Why is that other person in that bar that night? Because that other person has nothing else to do. Now, do you really want to meet somebody who in life has nothing else to do after work, night after night? You probably don't, and neither do they. And so it's much more advisable to find some other way of meeting people than the way that conspicuously flags you as somebody who is slightly desperate and has nothing else to do. Adding to that, you mentioned something about, I think you mentioned something about using online dating.
Mm-hmm.
Online dating is risky, not as risky as bars, at least that you're at home. Um, but just because you're online doesn't mean that you're not having a conversation with an alcoholic, a drug addict, some kind of minor criminal. The big difference between online dating and in a bar is that you can't see the alcohol around, or you can't hear the slurred words. But there's still plenty of chance that the person that you're meeting, they're online because they've got nowhere else to go. They have no other idea how they might meet somebody. And so this isn't to say that people never meet in a bar and have a great relationship afterwards. It's not to say that people never meet online and have a great relationship afterwards. Those things do occur, but not as often as people would like. You're much better to find somebody that you are comfortable with doing something that you're proud of, and they're doing something that, if they had been a friend of yours, would make you proud of them. For example, one of the best ways of meeting people, particularly for this 30 to say roughly 55-year-old age group, for both men and women, is get involved in a big charity. The bigger the charity, the better the situation. And one of the reasons for doing that, not only are you doing some good, but you also have an opportunity to meet other people who are smart enough to figure out, if I want to meet somebody who is making a difference in the world and who also wants to socialize and find somebody else who's making a difference in the world, getting involved in a big charity can really be an asset. Now, someone might say, well, isn't that the wrong reason for getting involved in a big charity? Many doctors, many lawyers, many insurance salesmen, um, people of all sorts are involved in charities because in their professions, that's one of the ways they meet prospective customers in the future too. So it would be naive to think that all the people involved in charities are there solely for the purpose of helping out, say, heart disease or the ASPCA or cancer. They do help out in those areas. But it's a great way to meet other people too. It's a great way to meet other people who are smart enough to figure out this is a great way to meet people. People who are smart enough to say, these are people whose career extends beyond just putting in their 8 hours and then coming home and open up a brewski and watching TV. So uh, socializing at big charities is one of the best things you can do for your social life. When you first get through with a previous relationship that was a long time, you might be wounded. And at that point, you might not be ready for certainly going to the bars. You'll be going for the wrong reason. You'll be making all sorts of mistakes. Sometimes one of the best things you can do is get involved in some kind of adult singles group your church has or a neighboring church has. Now, you won't necessarily find the kind of person that you'd want to spend a lot of time with, but church groups do tend to be very welcoming to everybody. So when you first want to get your feet wet, your local church groups might be a way of just getting started, getting comfortable with talking to somebody, talking to them where there's no alcohol involved. Um, and then as you get on your feet, there's plenty of other venues to use. I mentioned the charities, ballet, opera, they will have support groups. Those are wonderful groups to get involved in, particularly for men to get involved in a support group for opera. You're going to be a very distinct minority among a lot of very cultured women. And that would be a smooth move for the men.
Classy.
And, so those would be good options. Another place in every city in the country, uh, there is a place where the young and middle aged go running. Here in Houston, it's famously Memorial Park. There's a perfectly good running track over by the Med Center, but it doesn't attract the same number of people that you have at Memorial Park. And so every night at Memorial Park in Houston, there's literally thousands of people, many of whom are single, and they're really happy to meet somebody else. There's no alcohol involved, no drugs involved, to meet somebody else who is taking care of their body, who they know are coming from work and doing what they can to live a good, healthy life. And you can always strike up at a conversation at a where people are running and so on by talking about the weather. Uh, and if the person, looks at you and sees that you might be of interest to them, they'll talk back and the conversation will take off. If they're not particularly interested, or maybe they're already married or they have somebody, they'll give you a quick and blunt, yes, it is, or not so much. And that's fine because you didn't risk anything of any substance in saying, some comment about the weather. And yet you did make an entree that if the other person was interested, they could follow up on. So uh, whether it's White Lake up at Dallas or Memorial Park in Houston, Central Park in New York, the lakefront in Chicago, all big cities have places where runners get together and walkers too. And it's a great time to casually strike up a conversation with somebody without making it look as though you're hitting on them.
So I can only imagine how many people you interviewed, and I'm sure thoughts came to your mind while they're talking to you. In your experience, when you were researching, what is the worst first date you heard about, or what is the best first date you heard about?
Okay. The worst, the worst date I ever heard about, and this almost sounded like it came off of Seinfeld, because it was funny, except it was true. This woman was very attractive, and I would guess she was in her mid 30s, and she had gone out with a fellow who was very handsome, tall, wealthy, well spoken, and but he had too much confidence for his own good. And they went to a restaurant, and they talked, and she was finding him somewhat tiresome just because he was so into himself, and she was very attractive and cultured herself. She it wasn't that she was lucky to be out with him, though she felt that that was his thinking on the whole prospect. And anyway, she when she told me the story, she said he finally got up and went to the restroom for something, and uh, he comes out of the restroom, and she said it's like the old television gag. He had toilet paper stuck to his shoe, and he didn't know it. He's walking back to the table, and people around are looking at him because he's got toilet paper stuck to his shoe. He's smiling broadly, and she knows that he's just thinking everyone is looking at him because he's so darn good looking. And she is laughing more and more. She can't hold it in. She doesn't want to be impolite. But he is just beaming by the time he gets back to the table, as she tells me the story, and sits down. And he said, what are you laughing at? What's wrong? And she said she really couldn't talk. I mean, how is she going to explain this to him? Particularly since C2 has been, well, she's been more than smiling. She said, I was, laughing because it got worse and worse as he got closer. And so she said, finally, I told him, you've got toilet paper stuck on your foot. She said he was furious. And he told her she was impolite. She should have never been, laughing at him. After all, he's paying for her meal, and this is a date that she had been invited on. And she said he just tore into her, and she couldn't believe it because she didn't put the toilet paper on his shoe, and she wasn't the only one laughing and smiling. The whole restaurant was laughing at him. He was embarrassed because he was being laughed at, but it certainly wasn't her fault. And she just couldn't wait to get away from the fellow because it was just a miserable, miserable night. And and it's really kind of interesting. Beautiful people don't often find one another beautiful.
So, what about the best one that you ever heard?
The best one I ever heard was from a relatively young fellow, and it was from the fellow himself in this case. He had asked this girl out. He was he had just gotten out of graduate school. He's in his 20s. Let's say he's in his late 20s. I don't remember for sure. And he wanted to do something special, and he didn't have much money. He was in a promising career track. I don't remember, so it might have been as an accountant. It might have been as a first year law student or law graduate, just beginning his career. But he, had a promising future. And there was a girl he really wanted to attract, but he didn't think he had the kind of money that it was going to take to pull that off. So he got a couple of his old fraternity brothers from college days, and they put a picnic basket out at one location in a park he was going to take this lady to. They put a couple of bicycles at another place about a mile and a half away from that, and they had done a couple of other things, like that too. And so he asks this girl out that he was attracted to, and he said dress for a casual date, maybe riding bicycles or so on. And so she was all right. Well, he picks her up, and they go out of the city. They went out of the city by 30, 40 miles or so. And he pulls over to this place where there are two bikes just waiting for them, and they were locked, and he had a key to unlock both of them. And so then they started biking, and then they go to someplace wherever that picnic basket was. And as the fraternity brother saw him pulling up, the fraternity brother leaves, and there's the picnic basket. And so there's a picnic right under a tree, and it's all very nice. And she didn't, hopefully, he thought, she didn't see the fraternity brother, but that this just happened almost by magic. And so there's a lot of planning going into this. It doesn't cost hardly anything, but there's a lot of planning going into it. And she's getting all aflutter. Now, here's where it really turned interesting. Because I got to talk to her later on. I asked her about the state, and she said, it was a wonderful day. Did he tell you about just how it ended? And I said, well, no, I thought it ended with a picnic. And she said, No, actually, the best part of the date was afterwards. And I said, well, what was that? And she said, well, we, bike our way back to his car, and he just barely started up, and we heard flap, 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 flap. He had a flat tire.
Oh,
And, he changed the tire himself. And the whole time he's trying to make her feel fine. He wasn't, she said, as many guys would do, they'd blow their top that, here they tried to make everything perfect and then something went wrong. And so they lose control and get mad and angry and they snarl and snap. And she said he wasn't like that at all. He spent his time changing the tire, clothes getting dirty, things aren't working out just the way he expected. But instead of going, darn, things aren't working out the way I expected, he's focused on her.
sure. Oh.
And she said that was one of the best dates she ever had in her life.
Do you know if they continued? Like,
I don't know.
I hope they did. So when you mentioned about the words, I was kind of giggling because I remember it brings up an episode in my mind of Seinfeld where Elaine goes to the restroom at a restaurant and she gets stuck in there because I think the whole episode is titled "Can You Spare a Square?" It was really nice.
Right.
Um, so when you talk about the this lady, the woman that you said she shared all this stuff, um, did other women tell you anything about what they tend to look for in a man? Because
Oh, yeah.
George
Yeah.
Clooney type, right? Like I wasn't one of those women who wanted a George Clooney type of tall, dark, handsome man. That wasn't my fantasy.
Yeah. With the audience that I was interviewing,
Uh-huh.
and so I've already told you, they're upper middle class and so on. I would, and I interviewed women from Boston to San Francisco, from Los Angeles to Miami. Okay. It initially it started sounding to me as though every woman I talked to was giving me some caricature of George Clooney, and
It's
they
the
didn't
whole
mention George Clooney, but the way they would describe the fellow, and what they would like him to look like, and what they would like him to do, how they wanted him to be in terms of verbal exchanges and so on. And it's like, wait a minute, you've all got one guy in mind, and this isn't going to work out well for most of you. And so I decided there's got to be a better way of finding out what they really like. Because the truth of the matter is, I don't know if any of us guys look like George Clooney except for George Clooney. So guys that don't look like George Clooney are still having great dates, going with lovely people, getting married to lovely people. You don't have to be George Clooney. So how do I find out what women really want? I figured, well, what I got to do, I've got to figure out a way of asking a question that brings down the barriers. And so here was the scenario that I would give them. And sometimes I would even be talking to two or three women at once, sometimes one woman. But here would be the scenario I would give them. It's your 25th high school reunion. You're at the hotel and, everything seems to be fine and so on. And, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, you and half a dozen of your best girlfriends and had a few drinks, and you're up in one of the girls' rooms, and you're talking about and all these girls are single that you're with that night, and you're talking about what would be the perfect guy for you. And then what they had to say was extraordinarily different from how I heard people talking about the perfect guy before, who always seemed to turn out to be a version of George Clooney. Um, they one woman I remember who had been divorced from a very wealthy guy, and she herself was a psychiatrist. She was doing well in life, and she said, this is just weird. It's just one of those psychological things that are, unique to me, and kind of laughed about it. But she said, I've always been fascinated. And remember this picture I've given you of her. She got a bunch of money out of the divorce. She herself is a psychiatrist. She's making oodles of money. She's well placed in life. I always was fascinated by guys who had calluses on their hands. She said, I don't know why, but the idea of a man being a working man, she said that always appealed to me. And she said it's funny because there's times when people that I've brought in to work at the house, they're doing outdoor work or whatever. Sometimes I'll look at him and go, I think he's really attractive. And of course, I don't say anything to him because, well, we're just not, in the same, social level or whatever. And that's true. But it's interesting what women might say when they're not echoing a party line about, what's the most eligible bachelor look like or be like? Um, how is he stationed in life? Uh, Things become much more variable when people look at themselves. And the same goes for guys. With guys, it's a little bit easier. Oh my God! So I'm able to ask the guys, what did you really look for in a woman? And of course, either they're going to come out with looks that fast, um, and but they don't seem to have the same. They're not all crying out for. Oh heck, who's the girl that's so popular right now as a singer?
Lady Gaga.
No, no, that's way back.
I'm just kidding. I'm just
Yeah.
kidding.
No, the Super Bowl. She did the ads for the Super Bowl for a couple of years. Uh, she's the most famous singer in the world right now.
The Taylor Swift.
Taylor Swift, yeah. Um, so, the guys aren't coming out and saying Taylor Swift. I'm sure they would find her very attractive, but they don't just name that. They have their different preferences. The preferences are almost always looks focused. Um, and then even when you press them for a little bit further, um, they want somebody they can depend upon. But their lists tend to be kind of short. Women's lists, by contrast, tend to be long, real long, way too long. And this is a good time to say something about lists. I don't know if you're going to ask me about that later on or not, but it's a good time to say something about lists. Ben Franklin, old Ben Franklin, was famous for making up lists. And there's a story about a young man who came to him and said, he thought it was about time that he get married. And but he doesn't know what he wants in a wife. And there's two women that he thinks either one might accept his uh, uh, solicitation, but he doesn't know which one to go to. And so Ben Franklin told him to write down each woman's name and then make up a list of pluses and minuses, plus have a plus column. And those are all the things that you would want in a wife. So you put that down on your list. And then you list all the things that you definitely don't want in a wife, and you put that down on a list. And then just go down that list and get plus and minuses to each of your candidates. And then the one that has more pluses and fewer minuses, that's the one you ask to marry you. And so, as the story goes, this is a true story. As the story goes, he does as Franklin had told him, and he asked this woman to marry him. She did. And just a few years later, they divorced. They divorced back in the 18th century,
Oh.
that long ago, where, it certainly wasn't common. Making lists is a horrible idea. And yet you still hear on, particularly on television shows where people are talking about dating, oh, he or she checks off all the right boxes. If you've got a list, you should be shopping for a product, like an automobile. You shouldn't be shopping for a romance or a spouse. Now, that doesn't mean that you ought not to make up a list if you want of red flags.
Mhm.
Okay, but that list was going to be pretty short. But don't make up a list of what you want, because nobody can know what they want until they see it packaged in another human being.
So, do you think he gave that advice before he published the almanac?
I don't know when he gave it, but it's a very famous account in writings today about decision theory and so on, because he's such a famous character, a scientist, a trained scientist as well, politician. And so for him to have come up with this idea of making a list and then pick out who you want for your bride as a result of who scored better on their list, it didn't work. Even for a guy as bright as that who gave that advice, it was just bad advice. You don't make up a list and then go out and shop for a spouse. You make up a list to go buy a car. You make up a list to go out and buy living room furniture. You don't make up a list to find your spouse.
So, Dr. Wagner, I'm curious, when men, how you mentioned about women when they were at a reunion or girls' party or whatever, do men's conversation change based on whether they're in a locker room or at a barbershop
Oh,
or
sure.
at a coffee shop or at a bar?
Well, men tend to be, well, in bars and in locker rooms, they tend to be rougher with their conversation and more blunt, more to the point. If they're out in public, even if they're just at a table by themselves, a restaurant or so, um, again, given the audience I have here, they tend to be more sensitive to the discussion. Uh, but they, and men also don't like to let out much about how they want their feelings protected if they were to find themselves um, involved with a romantic love. You know, uh, it's interesting when a man starts dating someone seriously. He's liable to find that a lot of his friends try to discourage him from that, and certainly don't marry her. And if he's thinking about that, they're going, no, 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 man, don't do that. It's too soon or whatever. Girls, on the other hand, have a tendency to, they may meet the fellow or whatever, and they go, oh, he's just wonderful. Oh, he's just, and they encourage the young lady to go forward with this relationship. Let's say in each of these cases, these two people do get married, not to each other, but they get married to somebody else. So now the guy is talking to his friends, and he's married this girl, and he says, "Boy, she isn't the way I thought she was, and I don't like this, and I shouldn't have gotten involved in this, and blah blah blah." His friends are more likely to not to ride him hard and say, "You look, you married her. That's your team. You've got to make it work. That's your responsibility." That's what guys tend to do. On the other hand, girls, if they find out that their friend who married this fellow that they were all encouraging her to go forward with, if she talks about, well, he turned out to be this way, he turned out to be that way, blah blah blah, they tend to say, well, we we talked about that. We knew there was likely to be something like that, but you shouldn't have to put up with that. And they throw hot coals on a fire that's already burning, and that doesn't help the relationship. So women are happy to encourage your friend to get together, you know, with a guy. Men do just the opposite. But once the man gets together with a woman, his friends tend to talk as though he needs to do whatever he needs to do to keep it together. Her friends encourage her to get together. But when there's anything that seems to go wrong, they seem to encourage her to pull apart. It's interesting how that goes. People need to take their time to find out where they're really comfortable. And there's a bunch of television shows on now about dating. From The Bachelor to The Golden Bachelor to Love Is Blind, Married at First Sight. I mean, they're on and on and on, right? Well, if you take a look at some of those shows, one of the things that you ought to pick up is that people at different ages are looking for different things. The older people are looking for something that's more endurable, which is kind of interesting because they have less time left on Earth.
Mm.
And the younger ones are looking for something that, has bounce right away. But hey, you should be looking for someone that can make it the long distance with you. Because if you pick out someone for marriage, it's a long time ahead. The old couple can pick out, somebody and, can turn out to be, a difficult relationship, but what the heck, there may only be a few years left, you know, uh, hang with it until it's over. Uh, just because you're young doesn't mean you can be frivolous about it. Look at what the old people are looking for in one another and think about, are you finding that in this nice looking guy or this nice looking woman or this wealthy man or this uh, charming and personable woman that you've encountered that's young? Uh, look for how comfortable you are with them when uh, the flash isn't so apparent.
Mm. So, would you say that today's easy access to social media and all this online social life and offline social life, um, just based on what how you describe the characteristics of women to women and men to men advice, so-called advice, that it has a bigger influence than before on the person's decision to stay together or to have
Oh, sure. We are
find
what
other
we're
people.
affected by what we surround ourselves with. We can't avoid that. We are what we become what we surround ourselves with. So if you want to have your relationship work and sustain itself, then there are things that you did before you ever got married that you just can't be doing anymore. And why not? Well, because you've got to be spending your time building up this relationship and not still hanging out with the guys or not, this or that. I want to go back to that young fellow's date where he got the flat tire, in a picnic basket. Because one of the things that uh, uh, the girl had told me was that when she first went out with him, she wasn't that interested in him initially. She thought he was a nice guy, um, but she, why not go out with him? And then after that whole date, flat tire and all, she was charmed by him, and they had been dating for several months by the time I met him. Uh, there was no way on that first night before they went out that she ever thought there was going to be any kind of a future with them, even going over the next few weeks. But as circumstances turned out, she got to see something about his real character. And unfortunately, on too many of our dates, and the better that we seem to think that day goes. We went to a nice place for dinner. We went to the opera perhaps afterwards, and then we had maybe we even took uh, uh, limousine to go do that. Everything was just dandy. It was so dandy we didn't get to know each other very well. That doesn't mean you should plan on getting flat tires just so you get to know the other person better. But you do, the reason for dating is you do want to get to know the other person. And there's nothing wrong with being attracted to calluses or to being attracted to any kind of physical feature, but there's got to be more. And that more cannot be limited to whatever you can put on some kind of a list. As the French have always said, there's got to be a certain savoir faire, which means the part that you can't explain, but somehow it's drawing you to this person.
Mm. So when in your after the research, in your opinion, who finds it easier to approach a member of the opposite sex, a man or woman?
Who should approach the other?
Who finds it easier to approach the opposite sex?
I I think people always um, find it awkward to approach somebody else. I think that one of the things that uh, helps us understand what approaching somebody else can amount to, finding out where they are in life. Uh, some people, they wind up at a bar shortly after getting a divorce, and it's because they're desperate. I'm lonely. And so my friends, male or female, my friends took me out. Let's go out. We'll have a few drinks. We'll meet some people. This person is lonely. They're much more likely to, one, get caught up with somebody they should never get caught up with. Two, not to present a very good side of themselves. When a person's wounded, they're not presenting their true self. And when they're wounded, they simply don't present well at all. Um, I remember talking with you in another context altogether about the movie A Beautiful Mind, and
Yes.
John Nash was with a group of his male friends, and these lovely ladies come into this restaurant that they were at. The guys all want to go rushing up to, particularly this one girl, let's call her Beauty. They want to rush up to Beauty and say, hello, my name's Frank. How are you? And John, as the movie portrays it, John convinces them all to stay here. And think about it. If you all go rushing up to Beauty, the best that can happen is that one of you succeeds in attracting her interest. And if any of you then turn to the other girls, it's too late because you've already said what you had to what you shouldn't have had to say to them. So right now, each of you pick out, but no one picks out Beauty. Each of you pick out one of the other girls that she's with, and nobody else can go and talk to that girl. Each of you then walks up and introduces yourself to the girls that you've chosen here. And there's a good chance that you'll all each of you will make a new girlfriend that night. And so, as the movie has it, the guys go up and they meet girls. The girls are all excited that some guy came up to them. And because you can imagine the girls are used to everyone rushing up to Beauty. But this time, somebody came up to Rita and, oh, well, thank you. And so the guys and the girls all couple off, leaving Beauty by herself. Wow. Now, this isn't the way the movie proceeded, but if we imagine, here we have the world's champion game theorist in John Nash, the mathematician John Nash. So now, not only is Beauty alone, and there's no one else around except I'm John, but on top of that, she's wounded, right? Because she usually gets flooded with all the attention. But now all of her friends got attention and they left her and she's by herself. That never happens. What's gone on? How has she lost it? And so he walks up and says, hi, I'm John. And she's like, oh, thank you. Thank you. So he could have been, besides being a great game theorist, a pretty decent psychologist if he had planned it out that way. The movie doesn't tell us it happened that way, but it's just kind of funny to recount that and think of how it might have gone. So when you approach somebody, it depends on, the situation that they're in. If somebody looks stressed, it probably isn't a good time to approach them. If somebody looks like they're having a great time with their friends, I think it's somebody's birthday or whatever, and they're, at the peak of celebrating one another, not a good time to approach. So you're looking at somewhere in between those, when the person is accessible and you're ready to engage and take it from there. One of the a little aside there, guys, don't make up lines, and girls, if you're going to approach a guy, don't make up lines either. Lines never work. They bore people. They irritate people. Um, just go up knowing nothing more than you want to meet this person, and whatever comes out of your mouth at that moment is probably the cleverest thing you could have come up with. But the old time lines, everyone's heard them, and everyone thinks that's so cheeky.
You know, I just wanted. I was thinking when you were talking about not having a checklist and the different scenarios you give. I know a few couples, more than three or four, that don't identify themselves as a man or a woman, non-binary, but they are very happy together and they've been married for years, and I don't see them differently. Like they are together, and I do wonder and ask, right? Like what keeps you together? A man to man or woman to women? What keeps you? And the most answers are very similar: the trust, the understanding, and the main importantly, the love. That they're not being judged by whatever they decide to do or however they're living their life, but that feeling that someone accepts them as they are. They didn't get it from the opposite sex they were with before deciding to go with the current person they're with. So it's very interesting how, um, regardless of your gender, when you are not influenced by what the media or what the society is pressuring you to do or setting these standards, baseless standards, to be married to someone, or for a good marriage you have to have this, it's this. It doesn't work with everyone, and a lot of couples that don't follow are absolutely fine. They're happy. They're living the fairy tale lifestyle. But it's very interesting.
One of the most important true statements that I ever hear myself making is this: I don't know. And so, just like when I described you the audience I decided to select to deal with, it was
Mhm.
because I couldn't cast such a broad net I could bring everybody into it. So I had to make limitations so I could focus more and offer something to people that I could study reasonably well, even though it's a lot of personality types. Um, but the sort of thing that you describe, that's way beyond any knowledge that I have, and it's way
Mhm.
beyond any of the parameters of the people that I interviewed when I was
Mhm.
initially putting this together. And I do think one of the most important things I ever have to say in life to myself and to others is I don't know. Um, I don't know. We help ourselves a lot when we tell ourselves I don't know. Don't try to force some kind of suspicion into your mind as though it's a piece of knowledge, when in fact all it is you're plugging a hole in your absence of knowledge. Sometimes we just don't know. And the
Yeah.
most important thing we can say is I don't know.
But it does. I guess that's the problem with a lot of the people, where they're not able to admit that. They're not able to admit. A lot of scholars too, right? Because they think, um, I've done enough research to know what I know, and they stay firm. But research is limited. We can't tap into every million different types of personalities that are out there. But this is very, I mean, you had a lot of people that you interviewed, because you did two books out of it,
Yeah,
and then
1,500.
1,600 people,
1,500.
1,500 people. Wow.
It was
And
about a
all,
4-year project.
wow. Are you gonna do one more?
I don't know what I'm going to do next. I've got about 3 articles that have nothing to do with this topic that I'm working on, and who knows? Who knows?
No, maybe you had love trauma, you have beyond love trauma, maybe infinity and beyond love trauma.
Now, the next popular article that I will finish writing is about my godfather,
Oh,
who uh, got shot down over China during World War II. And he and 3 other guys walked 1,500 miles through Japanese-controlled territory to get back to Allied lines. And I'm writing about his life on that 1,500-mile walk and what he did afterwards. But that's a whole different topic. But
Wow.
that's my next project.
So your grandfather was also in the military?
Godfather. Godfather.
Godfather was also in the military?
He was also what?
In the military, in the armed forces?
Oh, yeah. He was a pilot.
Wow. Wow. Maybe one of these days, do you plan to write about your experience in the armed forces?
No, and because my experiences were fun, and it's they're great to share with others who have been there, but they aren't worth the attention of other people.
Oh, well, can we do a short episode?
Maybe we'll talk about that
Yes,
later.
we can. All right. Well, Dr. Wagner, thank you so much for your cheerful self and sharing the knowledge with us and sharing what you wrote in the book and what you found in the research. It's very interesting how people think and how relationships work. And you tie the morals and the ethics and um, realities all together in your writing. That's what I enjoy, whether it's a book, whether it's an article. You seem to tie it all together very uh, like weaving of the fabric, like very nicely and neatly organized. So I truly appreciate your writing, and please keep writing what you're writing, and see if we can do an episode on a different side of you when you were in the army and your army days and what you did. Think about it. Think about it. No
Okay.
pressure. Well, thank you so much. For those who are interested in continuing with this book, the Beyond Love Trauma, it's also available on Amazon, and we will put a link in the description box. If you have any questions, please reach out to us. We will be doing more parts of this book. It's a long book, a lot of information, and we're just touching little topics or just few topics out of the book. It's
Let
a
me
lot.
give you just one tip. Give the
Uh-huh.
listeners one tip on dating. Let's call it the rule of three. You
Rule of
ask somebody
three.
out. The rule of
Oh,
three. Yeah. You
okay.
ask somebody out, whether it's a guy asking a girl out or a girl asking a guy out. Um, you say you've had a nice date. Things went well. You don't call back until 3 days and to ask for a next date. And why is the reason for that? If you call back that night or the next day, you sound like that's not going to go well for you when the other person has to make a decision about whether or not they want to see you again. When you don't call the next day, they've got to wonder, well, was that person not that taken with me? And the next day, the second day, they still don't call. Now you're really wondering if, boy, I thought everything went well, and I didn't know how I really felt about that person. They were okay, but I don't really know how I felt about them. And then the third day, you call. Because then they're so thankful that you called. The rule of three. If you wait till the fourth day, they think you're just a
Too
jerk
late.
because you really,
Too
that's right,
late.
because you didn't care enough to even follow up. And the another part of the rule of three, if you're just meeting someone, maybe friends tried to introduce you to somebody, or you met online for coffee somewhere, which if you're going to meet online, you should meet for coffee. No dates, no dinner, just meet for coffee and talk face to face if that's the route you want to go. But keep it short. And so the rule of three comes in 30 minutes. 30 minutes is all you need to get a feel for whether or not you guys, if you met under ordinary circumstances, will want to see each other again. And, a cup of coffee, no one's bound to make it work that night. It's just we've met. And now we can see where we go from there. Um, the rule of three shows up a lot of places in dating. 3 weeks, you date somebody for several times, 3 weeks. If you've been dating them several times, during that 3 week period, you better make up your mind. at the end of the 3 weeks, do you want to keep on dating this person or not? Because after 3 weeks, if you've done a lot of dating in that short time, the other person reasonably has expectations that, you guys are clicking. If you're not clicking, but you just haven't got anything else to do, it's really not fair to take the other person's time that way. So 3 weeks, you pretty much have an idea of whether or not this is worth pursuing. And if it isn't, let both of you get free. Um, with the audience that we're talking about, rule of three comes up again. 3 months. After 3 months, people start talking about, well, are we an item? Do you think we could ever go the whole distance and so on? That talk tends to come up in about 3 months. Well, where do you go from there? Expect it to come up, and then figure out, it's serious time. Do you want to move beyond 3 months? A lot of people wind up getting married because of what we call moral obligation. I mean, you've been with the person for so long. I mean, how can I say, no, I don't want to marry you? I mean, we've been together for a couple of years and we've talked about it and all that, but sometimes people stay together much longer than they should. And, you don't want to break up a marriage. So if you're not comfortable with a person after 3 months or whatever, let them go. And you jump back into the pond, no matter how scary it may seem. But don't let yourself, out of a sense of moral obligation or whatever, somehow back your way into a marriage that you're not really committed to. You're going to find yourself in a whole pile of trouble if you do that. So the rule of three, 30 minutes, 3 dates, 3 months.
Wow.
Okay, so we'll talk more.
Yeah,
Next
so
time.
for more similar tips or better tips, do read the book or join us next time for the second part and then the third part. Again, Dr. Wagner, thank you so much for your time and the wisdom you always share. Thank you, sir. Namaste.
Thank you. Namaste.